Fitzgerald was launched in 1958. She was the largest carrier on the Great Lakes. For the next 17 years, she routinely hauled iron ore from Silver Bay, Minnesota, all the way to Toledo, Ohio. But on the infamous night of November 10th, 1975, her legacy changed as the ship sank to the bottom of Lake Superior, claiming the lives of all 29 men on board. Welcome to Fox 2's special presentation, The Gales of November, the legacy of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I'm Derek Kevra. It was 50 years ago that the news trickled in that the SS Edmund Fitzgerald had succumbed to the winds and waves of Superior. But 24 hours before the ship went down, it was business as usual for the crew as they loaded up for their final voyage of the year.
That it happened so quickly that there was little chance that anybody from the crew could have survived this disaster.
Just like that, it went down. It's less than a minute. Cracked in half and it's gone.
No one could have imagined that when the SS Edmund Fitzgerald set out from Wisconsin to Detroit in early November 1975, that trip would be its last. Certainly not its captain or 28 crew members who were making a journey they had already made hundreds of times. Where does it take off from and where's the course it takes that night?
Fitzgerald did 80% of its trips actually leaving Silver Bay, but this trip actually came out of Superior, Wisconsin.
The 5-day trip was one the famous ship made almost 50 times a year. But on November 9th, as the Fitzgerald leaves the Burlington Northern docks, loaded with 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, a storm in Oklahoma is headed in her direction. A storm pattern typical for this time of year. So they set sail. Soon after, the Fitzgerald meets up with another vessel, an important character in this story, the Arthur M. Anderson.
So they start to go up together, and they have a decision to make here. The Blau is already hiding from the storm. It's larger than the Fitzgerald. Do they go around and hide from the storm, or do they keep going?
Rick Mixter, a Fitzgerald documentarian, has spent decades telling stories of the shipwrecks on the Great Lakes and has become an expert on tracing the last hours of the Edmund.
Typically, you'd go the shortest distance to get to Whitefish Point, but here they decide to go very far north because they know when that front comes in, the waves are going to build.
Around 1:40 p.m., Captain Ernest McSorley issues a radio call that his vessel, the Edmund Fitzgerald, is rolling from inside the pilot house. Outside, blistering wind, heavy snow, and low visibility are making the water hazardous. 2 hours later, reports of damaged vents and broken fences come in, and the U.S. Coast Guard issues an emergency broadcast to find safe anchorage.
That means there's 8-inch openings in the deck with water pouring into the Edmund Fitzgerald.
And not only that, there's also possible damage from previous storms over the years. They could have stopped behind Slate Island near Canada, but instead, they push on. At the Otterhead, they turn south, hoping to slip between Michipicoten and Caribou Islands as they meet the heart of the storm. Around this time, the Fitzgerald's captain reports their radios are out. They're blind. They're going to need the other ship, the Arthur Anderson, to guide them. At 7:10 p.m., the Arthur Anderson's first mate radios to the Fitzgerald to ask how they're doing. Their famous response from Captain McSorley, "We're holding our own." But they weren't. It would be the Fitzgerald's final radio message. The ship vanishes soon after, along with its crew. The wheelman on board the Arthur Anderson would later tell his captain he thought he saw the Fitzgerald's stern light disappear from the water's surface.
He had a lift and he said he was holding his own. The last time I talked with him, he said he was holding his own, and that's the last time I lost contact after that.
Beyond debris, the only signs of what happened was the recovery of 2 inflatable life rafts and the remains of 2 steel lifeboats, one found floating near the wreck site and the other washing up in Canada.
They are proof that this event, this sinking, happened so quickly that no one had a chance to survive because no one made it into the water to get to a life raft.
After the Edmund sank, the powers that be took a long, hard look at safety standards, and they made some changes. For example, enhanced communication gear was now required with backup power for radios, as well as stronger hatch covers and mandatory depth finders. One more big upgrade, weather reporting improvements. That's right, forecasters reviewed their current weather communication protocols, and they made some changes for when the gales of November come early.
nothing could destroy the Fitz except a fierce November gale on the lakes. Lake storms are possibly the most feared in the world. Great Lakes sailormen are said to ponder the curse of the 11th month, November.
They are called the Gales of November, late-year wind events with a ferocious energy that can bring monster waves, howling storms, and are behind what is considered a graveyard of sunken vessels, including the region's most famous shipwreck, the Edmund Fitzgerald. They visit the Great Lakes every year, low pressure pulling cold air from the north, mixing with comparatively warm water temperatures and fueling unstable weather systems. The result? Hurricane-force winds and waves that reach 3 stories high.
And the thing on the Great Lakes is, we're different in a sense that on the ocean, when you get hit by a wave, it may take a little bit longer to get hit by the next wave. Whereas here on the Great Lakes, our frequency of getting hit by waves repeatedly is much higher.
It's on the 350-mile-wide Lake Superior, where these extremes happen on a grand scale.
How bad was it out there?
Well, when the sea starts coming over the pilot house, you know that you got a pretty big sea.
The pilot house is 50 feet high.
It's at least 50 feet high on the ship.
Donald Erickson, captain of the William Clay Ford carrier, describes what it was like on the water after the storm had passed. You see, he was the first person to search for survivors after the Fitzgerald sank.
This was a very large storm system, a very strong storm system, and the impacts can linger for quite some time.
The storm that hit the Fitzgerald started over Oklahoma. It moved north through the eastern UP and then into the eastern side of Lake Superior before continuing north into Canada. The first gale warning issued on November 9th, the day before the ship sank. Nowadays, when severe weather warnings are issued, we all get those alerts on our phone. Well, that was different in 1975. However, at 2 a.m. on November 10th, when the gale warning was upgraded to a storm warning, the captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald did indeed receive that information. But there wasn't much he could do. The Fitzgerald was stuck in the middle of a strengthening storm with 60-mile-per-hour winds at its back being tossed around in 25-foot waves. Captain McSorley had one choice. After traveling almost the entirety of Lake Superior, he had to get to Whitefish Point. In the end, he couldn't compete with the gales of November and sank 17 miles from shore. A lot has changed since 1975 when it comes to forecasting severe weather on the Great Lakes. Over the last decade, improved buoys and sensors give weather modeling a head start to predicting when and how severe weather will affect shipping. Additionally, in 2021, the U.S. Coast Guard began to regularly use Safety Alert 0721. That's an alert for mariners for unexpected heavy weather dangers, and that points out rapid and extreme shifts in the weather. Coming up after the break, one thing that Edmund experts can agree on is that most people can't agree on why exactly the Fitzgerald went down. We're going to take a look at the leading theories and what has changed in the last 50 years. Next. exactly was it that caused the Edmund Fitzgerald to sink? Books, websites, experts can't agree on a single reason. And it seems that the more time that passes, the more confident people get in their own theories as to what and why the great ship sank.
Occasionally would creak. You'd hear and here I am, a 19-year-old kid, and I'm a little concerned by what I'm hearing and seeing.
And who wouldn't be? Tom Walton described what it actually felt like to sail on the Edmund Fitzgerald. In 1963, he spent his summer as a cook on the carrier, following in the footsteps of his father and uncle.
For a few weeks, we were shipmates, not just father and son, and that was really cool.
Tom was on the Fitz 12 years before it sank. But even then, he remembers ominous signs about the way the ship would bend while on the water.
So I asked the first mate, I said, this is kind of scary or frightening to me. Is it normal? And he said, well, it is. He said, it's like a skyscraper in high wind. It's supposed to bend a little bit. But, you know, years later, after the tragedy, I wondered if it was supposed to bend quite that much.
November is a treacherous time on the lakes, and that is no mystery. What is, in the concerned minds of the Coast Guard and the Lake Carriers Association, is the precise manner in which Superior swallowed the Edmund Fitzgerald and her seasoned crew of 29.
It's a question as relevant now as it was 50 years ago. What sank the Edmund Fitzgerald? Was water allowed to leak in from the top? Was it carrying too much cargo to begin with? Did it strike unmapped shoals, sustaining damage to the hull as it raced to escape the bad weather?
Boats sink. When they sink in this capacity, they sink for one reason. They're taking on water.
In the months afterwards, 3 theories took hold about what could have happened. The Coast Guard blamed unsealed hatch coverings that allowed topside flooding. The National Transportation Safety Board said a hatch had actually imploded, leaving a giant hole for water to pour in. The Lake Carriers Association said that the boat had a grounding incident near one of the islands. Now, that damaged the bottom of the boat. Over time, as the ship swayed back and forth, it took on more and more water, causing it to lose its buoyancy.
And so we talk about all 3 of them because we're never going to know. There are no one's going to step forward and say, oh, I was out there, I saw it happen. So there are no eyewitnesses to be found.
Even former Fitzgerald sailors have their own theories, with some blaming poor maintenance.
In Superior, in the shipyard, they repaired, I think, maybe a third of it. The whole keel was loose, not just half of it.
The last people to see the Fitzgerald were aboard the Arthur M. Anderson, which had tailed the ship throughout the storm. By then, the Fitzgerald's navigation had been knocked out. There was observable damage on the ship, and the storm wasn't letting up.
I asked him how he was making out with his problem. He said he lost those vents and he had a lift, and he said he was holding his own.
It's almost like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong that night.
So many of the accidents are not just one thing. It's never just the hatches. It's never just, you know, the keel being loose. It turns out to be a series of things that go wrong, and that's what causes catastrophes, and that's why 29 guys are missing.
Even as the cause is debated, trips down to the Fitzgerald wreckage reveal that the ship split apart at hatch 8. That was one of the openings where cargo was dumped into the carrier. The center of the ship disintegrated, while the back of the ship flipped over and landed upside down.
And this has always been the mystery, and something I've never been able to figure out is why is that aft section flipped upside down only 150 feet or so, or, you know, from the Edmund Fitzgerald's bow section, which is right side up.
It's one of the many questions that remain unanswered, and likely never will be. Trips down to the shipwreck are no longer allowed, preventing any further disturbance of what is now considered a gravesite. For many, that's the way it should be.
The history of the Fitzgerald is not just about the last 5 minutes of her life. And those 29 souls, those 29 people who were lost on that wreck, their personal history shouldn't be written by their last 5 minutes.
Author John U. Bacon's newest book, The Gales of November, The Untold Story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, dives deeper into the theories of what happened that fateful night to take the ship down. He joined us for an interview on Fox 2 News, and he shared where his research led him when it came to the hatch theory. Saying in your research, you do not think it was a hatch issue.
No, it's very unlikely. I talked to 2 crew members who were on the ship that year, and they say there's no way they go out without all 1,400 latches, dogged down, as they say, fastened to the cargo covers. So that is very unlikely, and what they found on the bottom of the lake, of course, is that they've been latched appropriately. So that theory is not very strong.
Coming up next, while the Fitzgerald is the most famous shipwreck on the Great Lakes, it is far from the only one. After the break, a storm in 1913 sank 19 ships and took almost 10 times as many lives as the one that destroyed the Edmund Fitzgerald, and that is not even the deadliest one. The argument that outside of the Titanic and the Lusitania, the Edmund Fitzgerald is the 3rd most famous shipwreck in history. What might surprise you, however, is how many ships have gone down on the Great Lakes. Most estimates run into the thousands, and almost all of their crews had the same confidence that it won't happen to us.
And so a lot of people had sort of said, we've done it. We've conquered the seas. We are never going to have another shipwreck of that size.
In 1975, a belief had taken hold in the Great Lakes that shipwrecks were a thing of the past. For 17 years, the Edmund Fitzgerald served as the queen of the fleet and a symbol of mankind's dominance over what was once considered a deadly profession. That supremacy was shattered on November 10th, 1975, when it sunk, sending ripples through the region and a chilling reminder of the dangers on the job.
There have been other ships lost, the Bradley, the Daniel Morrell, with as many lives lost in the last 20 years. But the Fitzgerald sinking made people realize that nature still holds the upper hand.
The Fitzgerald joined a list that's thousands of names long, intertwining its legacy with other ships that remain at the bottom of the Great Lakes. Ships like the Daniel J. Morrell, which broke up in a storm on Lake Huron in 1966, leaving only one survivor, or the Carl D. Bradley, which went down in 1958, losing 33 crew members. Only 2 were rescued. In 1940, the William B. Davik, the Nova Doc, and the Anna C. Mink all sank on the same night in Lake Michigan because of a particularly destructive storm. In 1913, the most damaging storm to ever hit the Great Lakes killed more than 250 people and sank 19 ships. Despite all that history, when people think of disasters on the Great Lakes, they think about the Edmund Fitzgerald, a cultural marker that overshadows all the others, but also also sparks curiosity and discussion about those Great Lakes wrecks.
The Fitzgerald does allow, it really introduces a lot of people to the drama, to the weather, and I say drama, it is drama that's really right off of these shorelines in some cases.
The fact that so many of these shipwrecks, they aren't cleaned up, they aren't taken away and rebuilt by the National Transportation Safety Board in some hangar somewhere to find out why they remain at the bottom. They are time capsules of history.
At the Mariners Church in downtown Detroit, Reverend Todd Myers sees a more intimate connection between the wreck itself and those involved in learning and celebrating its place in history.
The Edmund Fitzgerald has become part of us, and we've become part of the Edmund Fitzgerald story.
Despite its nickname as the graveyard of the Great Lakes, Lake Superior is not the lake with the deadliest single-ship event. That title belongs to Lake Michigan and the Lady Elgin, where the wooden-hulled steamship collided with a schooner, also in a gale force wind event. The ship was headed from Chicago to Milwaukee when it quickly sank after that collision. Nearly 300 lives were lost. Great Lakes shipwrecks have captivated the imaginations of people all over the world. Just ahead, how music, athletics, and even beer shape the landscape of the mystery of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
You've got
And curiosity of the Fitzgerald seems to resonate with people even 50 years later. From songs to museums to memorial swims, the legacy is just as strong now as it was in 1975.
There's going to be some drama, no question.
Jim Dreyer is known for his ultra swimming on the Great Lakes. That's why they call him the Shark. A few years ago, he had an idea to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Edmund Fitzgerald by swimming the ship's journey.
In 411 miles on these Great Lakes where the weather can change on a dime, there's going to be big waves that they have to fight through. There's going to be adverse currents that they're against. There's going to be cold water. Starting in Lake Superior, it's going to be chilly, even in late July.
The Edmund Fitzgerald's legacy lives on in songs and books and even craft beer flavors. Some people will visit the Shipwreck Museum on Whitefish Point to see the original Belle on display, while others can see the ship's anchor on Belle Isle. Many will also gather in downtown Detroit for the anniversary.
It's been 24 years since the Edmund Fitzgerald went down in Lake Superior. Every November since, mourners gather at the Mariners Church downtown to remember the 29 men who lost their lives.
It's a tradition that started in Detroit when the rector at the Mariners Church first learned of the tragedy.
When the maritime community called him, just out of reverence and respect for the lost souls, he went to our bell tower and rang that 29 times.
The tribute would be written about in a magazine, which found the eyes of a Canadian songwriter who would transform the story into something else much bigger.
Later that night when his lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Let's remember one thing. The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was a regional story. It was not the Titanic or the Lusitania. Okay, it was very much a regional story. It's the legend it is now because of the song.
As music historian Gary Graff puts it, most of the music people wanted to hear on the radio in 1976 were short, catchy songs. But then Gordon Lightfoot wrote The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, transforming it from a Midwest story into a global one. One of the best revisions also happened at the Mariners Church.
And when Gordon Lightfoot came at the 25th anniversary in 2000, sat right in the front row on the left side and got a tour of the building. It's like, I have to change these lyrics. It's not musty. I'll call it rustic.
This summer, inside that rustic old church, Jim Dreyer and 68 other swimmers gathered at the church and delivered taconite ore pellets to the deputy mayor, completing the final stretch of what would have been the Fitzgerald's final voyage of the season.
It's like all of the history came rushing in, all of the emotion came rushing in, and you just realize, like, we are in that rustic old hall in Detroit where they prayed, that Gordon Lightfoot was singing about, and ringing the bell for the 29 men again, hearing the names, it was just extremely moving.
In a musty old hall in Detroit, they prayed in the Maritime Sailors Cathedral. Superior, they said, never gives up the dead when the gales of November come early.
The first person to ring the bell 29 times honoring the Fitzgerald was Reverend Richard Ingalls, who led the Mariners Church for 40 years. Reverend Ingalls died in 2006, but his tradition, it lives on. We met his daughter Betty, who stood in the footsteps of her father and rang the bell herself. The tolling of the bells is now a tradition that takes place every year on the anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The bells are rung 29 times for each sailor lost in the wreck and one more time for all others lost at sea. 50 years, 29 lives, countless stories. We'll never know exactly what happened on the night of November 10th, 1975, but we do know the courage of the crew endures across the cold waters they once sailed, and their legacy will never be forgotten. Thank you for joining us.
Today on TMZ.
Well, how to say, Kim Kardashian, she's the best at almost everything, bar none. Kim Kardashian failed the California bar exam, but she's vowing to continue this long, now 6-year journey towards becoming a certified lawyer.
It was sad, though. I really wanted her to pass.
I did too.
But did you see the bikini photos she posted over the weekend?
Those were hot.
She didn't pass the bar, but she raised the bars.
This weekend was Chris's 70th birthday bash. We had Oprah,
Mariah Carey, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle were there.
Bruno Mars performed, but it was so rowdy that police were actually called and came to the house and gave them a warning and were like, hey, you guys are partying way too hard.
Do you think this is the first 70th birthday party to have the cops called on it?
The paramedics have been called many times, but not